Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Andrew and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, I'm going to be talking about my Week 4 waiver wire targets for the 2024 fantasy football season. Now, with all the injuries that have taken place thus far this season, we all have positional needs. I mean, we're talking about players going down this week like Devontae Smith, Trey McBride, Sam Laporta, Justin Herbert, Jalen Warren, Adam Thielen. So again, we all need to go ahead and hit the waiver wire. So over the course of today's episode, I'm going to be talking about players at a variety of different positions, the best available running backs, wide receivers, tight ends, quarterbacks, kickers, and defenses. Now, this video is being recorded before tonight's games between the Washington Commanders and Cincinnati Bengals, along with the Buffalo Bills versus the Jacksonville Jaguars. So if any players emerge as potential prospects that we want to target, I will mention it during tonight's live stream. I live stream every night via the channel. So for those of you interested, be sure to swing on by after the games. I'll be answering questions in regards to potential waiver wire targets, trade targets, and of course, start and sits for Week 4. Be sure to swing on by. Thank you very much. Okay, so let's go ahead and begin by talking about the running back position. I wanted to first and foremost mention these two players, Chuba Hubbard and Cam Akers, really quickly. PSA, if in fact they are still available in your league, be sure to pick them up. Of course, Chuba Hubbard currently on Yahoo Fantasy, only rostered in 51% of leagues, Cam Akers 46%. So I would assume that there is literally only 46% of leagues that is still awake because Cam Akers filled in for Joe Mixon last week. And if anybody doesn't already have him rostered, be sure to go ahead and do so because again, these players do have immense value in the absence of the primary starters, one being Jonathan Brooks for the Carolina Panthers, and the other being Joe Mixon for the Houston Texans. Thank you very much. Okay, so let's go ahead and begin with our number one, Braelon Allen of the New York Jets. The rookie running back has been incredible thus far this season. He's currently only rostered in 36% of Yahoo formats. In the last two games, weeks 2 and 3, he's accumulated a total of 18 rushing attempts for 88 rushing yards, 1 rushing touchdown, 7 targets, 5 receptions, 36 receiving yards, 1 receiving touchdown, averaging 14.7 half PPR fantasy points per game throughout that span of time. And you may be thinking, wow, is he the starting running back of the New York Jets? Well, no. This is all while Breece Hall is averaging over 20 touches per game and finding his own semblance of success via touchdowns. So going forward, this is going to be a two-headed monster. Very similar to what we have seen in the past with Nathaniel Hackett as a member of the Green Bay Packers as their offensive coordinator back in 2021. We have seen that Nathaniel Hackett likes to utilize a two-headed monster, a two-headed backfield, formerly with the Green Bay Packers with Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon, or perhaps Aaron Jones and Jamal Williams, just depending on the year. But going forward, this is going to be the Breece Hall and Braelon Allen show. And as long as Braelon Allen is going to be continuing to get a high volume of overall opportunity of touches, whether it's on the ground, through the air, he has enough talent to be a great fantasy upside player going forward at the position. Now, it can be argued that Bucky Irving, our number 2 for this week, should in fact be the number 1 overall running back. And if you'd like to go ahead and make that argument and go ahead and put him number 1 within your waivers, I have no issue with that at all. Bucky Irving at this current moment in time is currently only rostered in 35% of leagues on Yahoo Fantasy. Now, the reason why we can argue to put him as our number 1 running back is based on his overall performances in comparison to Rachaad White. Of course, Rachaad White last season finished as a top 12 running back in fantasy football, but thus far this season has been nullified across the board. Rachaad White thus far this season has 31 rushing attempts for 66 rushing yards, a 2.13 yard per carry average, while Bucky Irving has 25 rushing attempts for 154 rushing yards, 6.16 yards per carry. Earlier today, we did hear the head coach of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Todd Bowles, in fact say that Bucky has earned himself more snaps going forward. Thus far this season, he has only played 55 snaps in the 3 games. Those 55 snaps have led to 30 touches already. So if he's only going to get more snaps, that means more touches. And going forward, Bucky Irving is absolutely going to be digging into the overall workload of Rachaad White. And of course, in his own right, be a relevant fantasy star, just like Braelon Allen. Now, before I do continue on with the rest of the running backs, I do want to remind you guys, for those of you who haven't yet already, be sure to travel down to the description and check out Underdog Fantasy. At this current moment in time, if you sign up using code Andrew today and make a first-time deposit, minimum of $10, not only will you be able to claim the first-time deposit offer, but you'll get my rankings sent to you every single Sunday morning from my email directly to yours. These rankings are by position: quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end, kicker, and defense, including flex, half PPR, and full PPR. So for those of you interested in getting my rankings every Sunday in order to help you capture a 2024 fantasy football championship, be sure to do so today. All you have to be is, of course, eligible based on the right side of the screen. If you are not eligible, perhaps based on your location, or if you've used a code and signed up in the past, you can go ahead and check out the Patreon link also down in the description, where you can find all those rankings and unlimited questions in my direction. Thank you very much for all the support. And do not forget that if in fact you sign up today, the new customer special is 0.5 total yards with Joe Burrow tonight. Thank you very much. Okay, let's continue on with the running back conversation. I do want to continue hyping up the potential of Kareem Hunt. We did see last night that Carson Steele had 17 rushing attempts and a pretty good body of work overall. Samaje Perine got himself a lot of receiving utilization, but going forward, there is still a conversation of Kareem Hunt eventually being elevated to the starting lineup. And in fact, there is a possibility that Clyde Edwards-Helaire could also come off of the non-injury IR list. So if in fact there's going to be other running backs joining the conversation of this Kansas City Chiefs backfield, obviously it makes it a little bit more tricky. But if in fact Kareem Hunt, who is still widely available, only rostered in 33% of Yahoo formats, if in fact he's still available, we talked about it last week, he is still going to have value. There's a reason why they signed him. It's because they know that they need his services going forward. And we've already heard, of course, the running backs coach of the Kansas City Chiefs mention that he still got it. They just wanted to make sure that he had another week of practice under his belt before they send him out there, of course, coming off of the couch. But outside of that, of course, we want to continue to support the idea that Kareem Hunt should be involved within this Kansas City backfield going forward. Our number 4 is Rico Dowdle. Again, another one of these players that is typically rostered in a lot of leagues, but if in fact somebody has dropped him in your league as of late because he hasn't found an abundance of success, I know he's currently rostered in 42% of Yahoo leagues, but he's coming off a performance in which he had 11 total touches, 13 opportunities, and as long as the Dallas Cowboys are going to be implicated within negative game scripts going forward, of course the last 2 weeks against the New Orleans Saints and Baltimore Ravens have been blown out early. I mean, their upcoming schedule doesn't look like it's going to be very difficult, taking on the New York Giants or Pittsburgh Steelers, but then henceforth after that, they play against playoff teams across the board. Detroit, San Francisco, Atlanta, Philadelphia, and Houston. If in fact they're going to be a negative game scripts going forward after that, Rico Dowdle will claim the starting running back role over Zeke within this offense. Moving on to our number 5. So these are the two players that from 5 and 6 are going to be the guys that if you are playing in a 12-team league with a lot of bench spots, they are most likely going to be available for you. Everybody else has already been rostered. So in this case, we have Roschon Johnson that coming off of the week 3 performance against the Indianapolis Colts was able to get himself 13 total opportunities and additionally was highly efficient with those overall opportunities. 8 carries for 30 yards, 4 receptions for 32 receiving yards, 8.2 fantasy points. Now this is very important because DeAndre Swift over the course of the last 3 weeks has been nullified completely. Very similar in the way in which, of course, we have seen, a guy like Rachaad White nullified. DeAndre Swift coming off of a great year last season just does not work within this offense. From weeks 1 through 3, DeAndre Swift has himself 37 rushing attempts for 68 rushing yards. That's a 1.84 yard per carry average. Roschon Johnson played 37% of the snaps in comparison to Swift's 53% in week 3. But going forward, we should see a lot more usage out of Roschon Johnson. And there is even a possibility that he could take over this backfield, considering he is the only running back that has been efficient thus far this season. Now, the other running back I wanted to mention is Emanuel Wilson. Now that Marshawn Lloyd is in fact on the injured reserve, we know that the Green Bay Packers have shown over the course of the past couple years that they want to utilize 2 backs. So if it's going to be the 2-back set of Josh Jacobs and Emanuel Wilson, Emanuel Wilson's coming off a week of 12 carries for 50 yards, 2 receptions, 35 receiving yards, and a receiving touchdown. As long as we're going to have a 2-headed monster of sorts, of course, we're going to see Josh Jacobs be the primary number 1. But as long as Emanuel Wilson's going to get touches, once you get Jordan Love back into this lineup, it elevates the firepower of this offense and makes them that much more valuable going forward. A player that's only rostered in 3% of Yahoo leagues. All right, moving on to the wide receiver conversation. Let's begin with our number 1 and the thumbnail of today's episode. Jauan Jennings, wide receiver to the San Francisco 49ers. Yes, he was our reality stone in our week 3 hidden gems, but in no reality did I believe that he was capable of scoring 41 fantasy points in a half PPR scoring format, accumulating 12 targets, 11 receptions, 175 receiving yards, and 3 receiving touchdowns against the Los Angeles Rams. Yes, it was an incredible matchup, but we weren't anticipating that much level of success. Now, it wasn't able to be accomplished unless, of course, we had the absence of Deebo Samuel and George Kittle, who will continue to miss the next couple weeks here. And in their remained absence, Jauan Jennings is still going to be a value for fantasy purposes. That's why we want to mention him as our number 1. As long as Brandon Ayuk continues to struggle again thus far, Brandon Ayuk hasn't found himself a lot of success, even though he is coming off of a performance of double-digit targets, dropped many of passes, and does not look the same. Missing training camp definitely has made an impact on Brandon Ayuk. And instead, we're looking in the direction of Jauan Johnson, who's obviously had himself a lot of success. Now, once in fact we do get back a healthy George Kittle, Deebo Samuel, Christian McCaffrey, Jauan Jennings is not going to be someone that we can continue to trust for fantasy purposes. He is more of a short-term upside play that going forward within the upcoming matchups for the next 2 weeks, hopefully, he is going to be of value for fantasy purposes, which for many of us, considering we are missing the likes of Deebo Samuel, Cooper Kupp, Puka Nacua, A.J. Brown, considering we're missing such high-tier wide receiver talent due to injury, again, getting a player like this and putting him in your roster and finding immediate success is something that many of us absolutely require in order to pick up some victories in the coming weeks. Number 2 is Darnell Mooney, another player that we mentioned this time last week. Again, Darnell Mooney only rostered in 26% of leagues. The last 2 weeks has accumulated 15 total targets for 11 receptions, 154 receiving yards, 1 receiving touchdown, and is averaging 13.45 fantasy points per game in a half PPR. We have to remember, I mentioned this in the offseason, Kirk Cousins literally went out and recruited Darnell Mooney to join the Falcons. He specifically said that we're going to match any contract that the Bears offer you. So come over here, play with us. And thus far this season, he has been one of Kirk Cousins' favorite targets. Of course, Drake London and Darnell Mooney. We're pretty much ignoring the fact that Kyle Pitts is even on this team as of late. Therefore, Darnell Mooney, if he's going to be the number 2 receiving option, has himself a lot of value going forward within this offense. Number 3 is Quentin Johnston. Now, we're not 100% certain as for the severity of Justin Herbert's ankle injury. We know that he is dealing with one, and we know that he had to leave the game early due to it. But if Quentin Johnston is going to continue to maintain as the number 1 outside receiver and going to continue to score touchdowns, again, he has scored 3 touchdowns in the last 2 games. If that is only going to continue to occur, of course, this is a player that needs to be on roster. He's technically already rostered in 45% of leagues, so this is a player that I shouldn't have to mention because we already mentioned him last week and it was addressed, but I wanted to go ahead and mention it just in case you have him available in your league. Number 4, we have Wan'Dale Robinson. Again, another one of these players that we've mentioned in the past. Wan'Dale Robinson, as a member of the New York Giants, has honestly found himself a lot of success, has been able to score over 8 fantasy points and a half PPR each of the first 3 weeks. Over the course of those 3 weeks, averaging 9.07 fantasy points per game with 24 targets, 15 receptions, 123 receiving yards, and a receiving touchdown. The Daniel Jones passing offense of the New York Giants honestly hasn't looked half bad thus far this season. It's been able to support the fact that we already have Malik Neighbors as a wide receiver 1 in fantasy football. On top of that, Wan'Dale Robinson still being relevant every single week. We have our number 5, Allen Lazard. Considering the way that Aaron Rodgers talks about his rapport with Allen Lazard and the fact that he says that that is the strongest rapport amongst all the receivers with the New York Jets with him, that leads me to believe that Aaron Rodgers is only going to continue to lead the ball in his direction, has already connected for 2 touchdowns thus far this season with Allen Lazard, and if that's only going to continue to be a consistent option for this New York Jets offense, it's something that we need to address and potentially pay attention to going forward. Now, I also wanted to mention Adam Thielen. Even though I did mention that he got injured in week 3 due to a hamstring injury, there's a potential in which, of course, he's able to return it from that injury sooner rather than later. And if, in fact, he does, the final player prior to his injury was a receiving touchdown. He is going to find relevance, and Andy Dalton absolutely elevated this offense across the board. So if, in fact, this injury isn't going to hold him out for much longer, hopefully Adam Thielen is available. And if in fact he is, of course, is someone that we want to have on roster considering the value of this Carolina Panthers passing attack with Andy Dalton. Now, if in fact Adam Thielen is to miss time, let's go ahead and move on to these other wide receivers I wanted to mention. Xavier Legette, the rookie wide receiver. If in fact Adam Thielen does miss time, Xavier Legette gets himself technically more opportunity. Obviously, they're going to have to move either Xavier Legette and or potentially a guy like Jonathan Mingo into the slot position. But whoever does end up moving there is going to get themselves more snaps, more opportunities, and going forward, Legette is definitely a talented enough wide receiver that is only rostered in 10% of leagues to take advantage of the opportunity of the absent Adam Thielen. Jakobi Meyers is our number 8. He found himself a lot of success primarily because of the garbage time, that they had being down 20 plus points very early in that game against the Carolina Panthers. We did see a quarterback shift at the end of the game in which Gardner Minshew got benched for Aiden O'Connell. We'll have to wait and see whether or not that's going to be a consistent thing. But going forward, Jakobi Meyers still has value. Jalen Nailor has managed to score himself a touchdown every single week thus far this season. And we do know, based on what Kevin O'Connell, the head coach of the Minnesota Vikings, has said, Addison is still week to week. As long as Addison is out, and as long as Hawkinson is out, Nailor continues to produce as a top 36 wide receiver option. I got to put more respect on the name. Moving on to Michael Wilson Jr., who, again, has kind of made Greg Dortch kind of disappear within this offense. In terms of snap counts, in terms of overall target shares, in comparison to week 1, Michael Wilson Jr. is playing far more. He's coming off a week in which he had 9 targets, 8 receptions, 64 receiving yards. And as long as he's going to continue to be a huge part of this offense in the absence of a Trey McBride, because of course Trey McBride dealing with a concussion, there's a possibility in which Michael Wilson Jr. is an automatic start going into this upcoming week's matchup for the Arizona Cardinals. Moving on to DeMario Douglas, who's coming off himself a week in which he was able to accumulate 9 targets, 7 receptions, 69 receiving yards. He played the most snaps amongst all wide receivers for the New England Patriots in week 3. And if going forward, that is going to be a consistent option, DeMario Douglas, of course, proved last season that he can be fantasy relevant for many of us. The final option I wanted to mention is Tutu Atwell, the only wide receiver for the Rams that really popped in this most recent game. Obviously, in the absence of Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp, Tutu Atwell will be given more and more opportunity, and as long as that is the case, he's a short-term fix that still has himself a limited potential for upside based on how this offense performed. You got to remember, in the first quarter of that game between the Rams and 49ers, Matthew Stafford had 0 completions for 0 yards. So, again, this offense is still slow to start in many of their games. Tutu Atwell, a short-term fix maybe for 1 week here. All right, let's move on, and let's talk about the tight end position. Now, I had no idea that Cole Kmet was going to have himself this much of an incredible performance. We had a question yesterday throughout the live stream. Someone asked me Foster Moreau or the potential of Cole Kmet. Based on the overall opportunity shares that Cole Kmet was given in weeks 1 and 2, I couldn't have anticipated this kind of an explosion of a performance. I mean, just looking at weeks 1, 48% of the snaps, 1 target, 1 reception. Week 2, 77% of the snaps, which is great. 5 targets, 4 receptions, 27 receiving yards. In a game in which, of course, unfortunately, the quarterback Caleb Williams could not complete a pass more than 10 yards down the field. So, of course, the little dump offs were great. But in this scenario, we then go ahead and double the overall opportunity share of Cole Kmet in week 3, playing 81% of the snaps, getting 11 targets for 10 receptions, 97 receiving yards, and a receiving touchdown. If it wasn't for the fact that Dallas Goedert went for 170 receiving yards, Cole Kmet probably would have finished as the number 1 overall tight end within the given week. Nonetheless, Cole Kmet coming off an incredible performance, showing that he still has value for fantasy going forward. And in the absence of Keenan Allen, if Cole Kmet is going to continue to dominate within the short yardage receiving game, within the slot receiving role, hopefully he's going to be a fantasy option that we can rely upon going forward. Again, he has been the primary option of this offense in the past. He is talented enough to be able to take that and run with it. It's just a matter of if, in fact, Caleb Williams is going to continue to target him with a high volume of opportunity. Moving on to our number 2, we have Tyler Conklin. Tyler Conklin coming off a week in week 3 Thursday Night Football against the New England Patriots, in which he had 11.8 fantasy points. 6 targets, 5 receptions, 93 receiving yards. You got to remember, last season with the New York Jets was a relevant fantasy tight end. And throughout that span of time, found himself his most overall success with Zach Wilson in the lineup. As long as Aaron Rodgers is going to continue to utilize him as a primary receiving threat, we know that over the course of the last 3 seasons, sure, he hasn't been the greatest overall tight end, but he has been consistent in terms of receptions and yardage. Touchdowns hasn't been within the overall conversation for Tyler Conklin. Didn't score a single one in 2023, but going forward, as long as the yardage and opportunity is there, he's coming off of 3 consecutive weeks of playing over 90% of the offensive snaps. So certainly somebody of value. I do want to mention Elijah Higgins as our number 3, but if in fact somebody like Zach Ertz or Gesicki can be picked up before tonight's game, you should probably do so in the absence of Trey McBride going into this upcoming week. Elijah Higgins is technically the backup of Trey McBride. If he is not going to be able to clear concussion protocol, this is someone that you're not going to put in a waiver on, but in fact, you'll pick up later in the week, probably by Friday afternoon, Saturday morning, if in fact, again, Trey McBride is going to miss time. This offense likes to target their tight ends a lot. We've already seen Elijah Higgins score a touchdown in week 2. So going forward, if in fact we're going to be in a situation in which McBride is out, Elijah Higgins has himself a lot of value. Moving on to the quarterback conversation, we begin with Sam Darnold. Yesterday throughout the live stream, somebody had sent in a question that pretty much revolved around Dak Prescott or Sam Darnold within the given week. And I was 100% confident that Dak Prescott could outperform Sam Darnold, but boy was I nervous. Sam Darnold had himself an incredible game of 181 passing yards, 4 passing touchdowns, 23.24 fantasy points. But thus far this season, Sam Darnold has been great every single week. Week 1, 208 passing yards, 2 passing touchdowns. Week 2, 268 and 2 passing touchdowns. As long as he's going to continue to put together great performances, fantastic. I was nervous. Dak Prescott did in fact still outproduce Sam Darnold, but nonetheless, going forward, the fact that they are still within the same conversation just gives you an understanding as to just how valuable Sam Darnold can be going into the future. Because again, as the starting quarterback of an offense and a team that is continuing to roll through defenses that they shouldn't be able to. Again, beating up teams like the San Francisco 49ers and Houston Texans is quite impressive. They have a huge challenge on their hands going into this upcoming weekend's matchup against Green Bay. But again, Sam Darnold definitely in the top 16 quarterback conversation going forward. Speaking of being in that conversation, we have Justin Fields, who over the course of the last 3 weeks has been able to accumulate himself a 73% passing completion percentage. He only threw his first interception yesterday against the Los Angeles Chargers, but it doesn't matter. Justin Fields will not be replaced unless he, is leading to this Pittsburgh Steelers team losing games. The Pittsburgh Steelers run the ball and they play great defense. And as long as Justin Fields can be efficient with the overall opportunities and is playing as well as he has, of course, he is still going to be fantasy relevant, coming off of his best week thus far in week 3 and going forward is only going to continue to get better. Number 3 is Deshaun Watson. Even though Deshaun Watson is not a great, in real life quarterback, for fantasy purposes, he'll get the job done. Taking on the Las Vegas Raiders this week again, Andy Dalton just torched that defense. So, of course, why not Deshaun Watson? Now, speaking of Andy Dalton, I do want to mention Andy Dalton and technically Daniel Jones can be honorable mentions going into this week for those of you who want to pick up a quarterback and roll them out there. They're players that, of course, have played incredibly well as of late. Daniel Jones the last 2 consecutive weeks putting up great fantasy performances, has rushing upside, and Andy Dalton obviously coming off of an incredible performance and has an opportunity of taking on his former team, the Cincinnati Bengals, in week 4. All right, let's move on to the kicker and defense conversation. So Braden Narvison, the Green Bay Packers kicker, has put up 11, 12, and 13 fantasy points, only rostered in 2% of leagues. That needs to be addressed. Jason Myers has put up 10, 12, and 8 fantasy points, only rostered in 10% of leagues. Matt Prater has put up 8, 14, and 9, only rostered in 9% of leagues. Be sure to pick up these kickers, again, if in fact you are dealing with one that isn't as consistent as you would like. Now let's move on to the defensive conversation. The Minnesota Vikings currently rostered in 52% of leagues. Technically, amongst all of the options that I've mentioned on today's episode, the Minnesota Vikings are rostered in the most percentage of leagues. They've put up 22, 13, and 13 fantasy points. They've allowed to opposing offenses 6, 17, and 7 points. They are the best defense in the National Football League, or that can be argued going forward, but again, they should be picked up. The New Orleans Saints, in that top tier conversation as well, they've put up 14, 8, and 11 fantasy points as a defense. They've allowed 10, 19, and 15 points to opposing offenses. Then we move on to, of course, the Tennessee Titans. The Tennessee Titans take on the Miami Dolphins. If in fact the Miami Dolphins are going to be without Skylar Thompson, and they're going to have whatever backup they want to throw out there. Hopefully it's going to be Tyler Huntley for the sake of Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, Devon Achane's value. We're going to have to wait and see, but the Tennessee Titans certainly can be a defense that you might want to roster and throw out there if in fact we have, Tim Boyle starting at quarterback for that offense of the Miami Dolphins. Okay, guys, that's going to cover it in regards to my week 4 waiver wire targets. Thank you everybody for watching. Be sure to go ahead, click the like button, subscribe if you haven't yet already. I'll be back tomorrow with my top 40 running back rankings for week 4. Outside of that, again, I'll be live streaming after tonight's game, so if you guys are interested, be sure to swing on by. Thank you everybody for watching, and until next time, I'll see you guys. Peace.